The Grand Hall of the Orlith Empire had always been a place of perfect order. Its tall crystal pillars reflected pale blue light, and its marble floor shone with such clarity that visitors often saw their own faces staring back at them. Every sound echoed, yet nothing ever seemed loud enough to disturb the deep, ancient silence of the palace. That morning, however, the silence felt different. It was the kind that grows before a storm, the kind that warns everyone present that something unusual is about to happen. Thousands of nobles stood on both sides of the hall. Their long robes shimmered with woven metals and small gemstones. Their expressions were controlled, but curiosity leaked through their eyes. The emperor himself sat on the high throne made of living stone, a material that responded to his thoughts and glowed softly when he breathed. Emperor Vialtor was a tall, silver-skinned figure with calm authority. He rarely showed emotions, yet his gaze now carried a rare tension. He was waiting. The large doors at the end of the hall opened at last. 2 Orlith guards stepped aside, and Princess Seralith walked forward in a slow, graceful stride. Her presence alone changed the air of the room. She was known for her sharp mind and gentle strength, and almost everyone respected her. The nobles bowed as she passed, though a few pretended not to look at the figure walking beside her. He was the reason for the tension. A human. Elias Ward walked next to the princess with posture straight and eyes steady. His clothes were simple, a dark suit with clean lines. Nothing like the sparkling robes the nobles wore. He lacked the soft glow of Orlith skin and the ethereal grace of their steps. Instead, he moved with a grounded confidence, the kind that came not from beauty but from experience. Many nobles stared at him with disbelief, others with insulted pride, and some with poorly hidden fear. Humans were not a common sight in the palace, and certainly not beside a royal daughter. Elias felt their eyes, but he did not let it show. He kept his focus on the throne, matching the princess's pace. Seralith occasionally glanced at him with a soft calmness, almost as if reminding him that he wasn't alone. There was no nervousness in her expression, only certainty. They reached the middle of the hall. The murmur of whispers finally faded as the emperor raised his hand. "Seralith," Emperor Vialtor said, his voice echoing through the chamber, "you have returned from your diplomatic journey sooner than expected, and you are not alone." His gaze shifted toward Elias. Though his expression remained neutral, the air thickened. The emperor was not angry, only deeply curious, and perhaps a little cautious. Seralith stepped forward. "Father," she said with steady respect, "I bring before you a man I have chosen." "His presence is unexpected," the emperor replied. "Few humans have ever entered these halls. Fewer still have stood before the imperial throne." Murmurs rose among the nobles again. Some whispered to one another, trying to guess what was coming. Others stared at Elias as if he were a puzzle they'd never thought they would have to solve. The emperor continued, "So tell me, daughter, who is he?" Seralith did not hesitate. "He is Elias Ward," she said clearly. "He is a human, the one I married." The hall burst into immediate chaos. The nobles gasped. Some shouted in disbelief. A few staggered back as if the words themselves were an attack. The emperor's eyes widened, a rare crack in his composed mask. Even the throne beneath him pulsed faintly. Reacting to his surprise, Elias remained still. He had expected this. His world was far from the elegance and tradition-heavy culture of the Orlith. To them, humans were seen as a young and unpredictable species, a race known for ambition, bravery, recklessness, and a stubborn will that sometimes bordered on foolishness. The Orlith considered themselves wiser, calmer, and superior in almost every way. That was why Elias knew this moment would be difficult. The emperor slowly rose from his throne. His voice cut through the noise. "Silence. Silence." The hall obeyed. "Seralith," he said, "you speak of marriage, a union between our noble house and a human. This is not a small matter. The path you have taken goes against tradition, against expectation, and against the assumptions of our people." "I understand," she answered, "and I accept every consequence. But I stand by my choice. Veiltor studied her for a long moment, then turned his gaze back to Elias. Human, he said. Step forward. Elias obeyed, moving until he stood only a few meters from the Emperor. His heart beat faster than he wished, but he controlled his breath. The Emperor's presence was powerful, almost overwhelming, but Elias refused to look away. You stand in a hall built by an empire older than your world's written history, the Emperor said. Do you understand the weight of your actions? Yes, Elias answered. I understand what it means to be here. I also understand what Seralith means to me. I'm not here to dishonor your traditions. I'm here because I love her. Gasps rose again, not because of the words, but because of how direct they were. Orolith nobles valued caution and diplomacy. Humans had a reputation for speaking from the heart, without filters. And this confession only strengthened their stereotype. Some nobles sneered, others looked away in confusion. The Emperor's expression remained unreadable. Love is a word your species uses often, he said. But words alone are not enough to bind two worlds. Elias nodded. Then I'll prove they're more than words. A ripple passed through the hall. The Emperor did not respond immediately. Instead, he studied Elias with an intensity that felt almost like a mental test. Elias couldn't read his thoughts, but he could feel the weight of the judgment. Then the Emperor spoke to his daughter again. Seralith, did you make this decision alone? No, she answered. We made it together. Not as princess and outsider, but as two people who trust each other. What of your duties to the Empire? I have never abandoned them, she said. And I will not start now. Veiltor exhaled slowly. Your choice has placed this hall in turmoil. He glanced at the nobles. Many will question your judgment. Many will demand explanations. And others will fear, this union will weaken our bloodline. Seralith's voice remained steady. If they doubt my strength because of who I love, then I will show them they are wrong. The Emperor turned back to Elias once more. Human. You stand inside the heart of a civilization that has survived countless wars and shaped centuries of peace. You are surrounded by those who do not believe you belong here. Do you fear them? Elias shook his head. I don't fear being underestimated. Then what do you fear? Failing the person I care for. Some nobles shifted uncomfortably. Others stared harder, trying to find deceit in his words but finding none. The Emperor paused, letting the silence stretch as if testing Elias's patience. But Elias didn't waver. At last, the Emperor spoke with slow gravity. If you truly intend to join this family, then you must face the trials of legitimacy. The hall reacted with shock again. The trials were ancient and harsh, meant for species with great natural abilities, not for humans who lacked psychic strength or enhanced bodies. Seralith stepped forward immediately. Father, he does not need to. He must, the Emperor said firmly. Every outsider who seeks a place in the imperial bloodline must prove their worth. If he fails, the union cannot stand. Elias looked at Seralith. She looked back with worry but also trust. He gave her a small, steady nod. I'll take the trials, he said. You understand that they were not designed for your kind? The Emperor asked. I understand, Elias said. But I also understand humans. We survive things we're not built for. The hall fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. It wasn't fear or anger, it was anticipation. The nobles who had doubted him now watched with a new type of curiosity. Some wondered if the human was simply arrogant. Others wondered if he might actually succeed. The Emperor slowly sat back on the throne, the stone beneath him glowing faintly. Very well. At sunrise tomorrow, the trials will begin. His voice grew harsher. And all will witness whether humanity is worthy of standing beside the Orolith throne, or whether this union ends before it begins. The princess reached for Elias's hand. He took it without hesitation. The hall was still filled with doubt, confusion, and judgment. But Elias did not feel overwhelmed. He had walked into dangerous places before. He had faced enemies far stronger than himself. And now he faced a test for something far more important than survival. He faced it for someone he loved. and no amount of ancient tradition was going to shake him. The sun rose slowly over the capital city of the Orlith Empire, casting long golden lines across the palace grounds. The air was crisp, and a quiet breeze passed through the silver-leaf trees that surrounded the courtyard where the trials of legitimacy would begin. Even at this early hour, hundreds of nobles, officers, scholars, and curious citizens gathered behind the shimmering energy barriers that marked the trial grounds. They had come not only to witness tradition but also to see if a human, one of the galaxy's most underestimated species, could survive a challenge designed to defeat even the strongest. Elias Ward stood in the center of the courtyard, wearing the same simple clothing from the day before. He had refused ceremonial armor or special equipment. His reasoning had been simple. The trials were not about looking powerful but proving who he was inside. Still, standing alone beneath the morning sun, he felt the weight of thousands of eyes pressing against him. Princess Sarilith stood on a raised platform beside her father, the Emperor. Her presence brought him a small amount of calm. Even from a distance, she was trying to look composed, but Elias could see the quiet tension in her hands. She believed in him, yet she feared the price of the Empire's traditions. The Emperor stepped forward, his voice strong and steady. "Elias Ward of Earth," he said, "before you stand the ancient trials of legitimacy. These tests were created to reveal the truth behind one's character. Strength alone is not enough. Intelligence alone is not enough. Willpower alone is not enough. Only those who embody all three may stand beside our bloodline." Elias nodded once. "I understand." The Emperor raised his hand. The energy barriers shimmered brighter as if preparing themselves. "The first trial begins now." "Oh." A loud hum filled the courtyard. The floor beneath Elias shifted, forming dark panels that rearranged like moving puzzle pieces. Within seconds, a large maze rose around him, walls tall enough to block even the tallest Orlith from seeing over them. The structure twisted and wound like a living creature, built to confuse the mind and disorient the senses. The first trial was the trial of clarity, a labyrinth designed for species with telepathic or heightened perception. Humans had neither. Elias entered the maze without hesitation. The moment he stepped inside, the walls began glowing faintly with moving patterns. The light pulsed rhythmically, creating a hypnotic effect meant to distract or confuse. Many Orlith nobles watched with mild amusement. They whispered to each other, convinced the human would fail within minutes. They did not know that Elias had once survived a shipwreck inside a collapsing mining station where darkness had been absolute. They did not know he had trained himself to control his breathing in hostile environments. And they certainly did not know that humans had one advantage many species underestimated: instinct sharpened by fear and curiosity. He closed his eyes for a moment, shutting out the pulsing lights. He let the sounds guide him. The faint hum of walls shifting, the echo of his own footsteps, the soft whistle of wind from the open courtyard. Then he began walking, tapping the walls lightly with his knuckles. The echoes returned to him like quiet signals, helping him map the structure in his mind. The maze was meant to confuse the eyes, not the senses humans relied on for survival. Minutes passed. The nobles murmured in confusion when Elias avoided dead ends without stopping. Some Orlith psychics tested the maze with their minds and felt disoriented themselves, and yet the human moved with slow, steady confidence. Sarilith watched with a tight grip on the railing. Her father glanced at her and noticed her fear, but he said nothing. The trial had begun, and it would end with truth. After nearly half an hour, the maze shifted again, this time violently. Walls rotated, floors dropped, and pathways sealed behind Elias with thunder-like force. The momentary shock hit him hard, but he steadied himself quickly. Simply following the echoes would not be enough now. The maze had grown unpredictable. He crouched, placing his palm flat on the floor. Vibrations rolled through the stone each time the walls moved. He used the rhythm of those vibrations to guess which sections of the maze were active and which were stable. He moved again, faster this time, adjusting each step based on the tremors beneath his feet. The crowd slowly grew silent. A few nobles leaned forward, watching him with reluctant interest. When Elias reached the center chamber, the floor sank slightly beneath his feet. A final challenge awaited him, 3 identical paths that could shuffle at random. Only one would lead out. The other 2 would trap him in an endless loop. Many challengers failed this part. Even psychics struggled because the maze reacted to their mental probing. Elias did not try to outthink the maze. Instead, he listened. Far above, the wind moved with a very soft tone. The path with the faintest echo would be the true exit, because that path had a direct line to the open courtyard. The other paths returned the sound too quickly. He chose the left path. Moments later, the walls opened, revealing the courtyard once again. The crowd erupted in noise, shouts, gasps, disbelief. Some nobles clapped unwillingly. Others looked embarrassed, after assuming the human would fail. Serelith exhaled with relief. The emperor watched Elias closely. Not with pride or approval yet, but with growing interest. Elias walked back to the center of the courtyard, shoulders squared. He was breathing heavier now, but still steady. The emperor raised his hand. The first trial is complete. His gaze sharpened. Now, the second trial. The second trial, a heavy door opened on the side of the courtyard. A tall Orolith warrior stepped through. His armor glowed with power, and his forearms were carved with ritual markings that signified strength and honor. He stood more than twice Elias's size. His steps made the ground tremble slightly. This was the trial of resolve. A duel of skill and courage, not to the death but until surrender. A whisper raced through the crowd. Many believed this would be where the human fell. Elias looked small compared to the warrior, and even the princess felt fear coil in her stomach. Elias had fought dangerous beings before, but never one so physically overwhelming. The Orolith warrior carried a long staff made of condensed energy, able to change shape at will. Elias had no weapon. The warrior bowed deeply, showing respect even before combat. Elias returned the gesture. The emperor raised his hand once more. Begin. The warrior moved first, a sudden blur of motion that surprised even some of the nobles. His staff swung in a wide arc, aimed to knock Elias off his feet. Elias rolled sideways just in time, the force of the strike cracking the stone behind him. The warrior smiled faintly. "You are fast, human." "Good," Elias said, catching his breath. "Then you won't get bored." The warrior attacked again with a rapid series of strikes. Elias dodged, ducked, slid between blows, and used every second to understand his opponent's rhythm. Humans were fragile compared to most species, but humans were also built for adaptation, for adjusting, for surviving. A blow caught Elias's arm, sending pain up to his shoulder. He gritted his teeth and stayed on his feet. Another strike nearly grazed his ribs. He felt each impact like fire, but he also began to see the pattern. The warrior relied on strength, expecting Elias to crumble quickly. Elias stepped back, pretending to stagger. The warrior lunged, bringing his staff down for a finishing blow. But Elias was ready. He dropped low, sweeping the warrior's legs. The much larger fighter stumbled, momentarily off balance. Elias used the opening to jump onto his back and lock his arm around the warrior's neck, not to choke him but to restrict movement. The warrior tried to shake him off, but Elias held on stubbornly. Humans were not the strongest species, but they were among the most persistent. The warrior finally dropped to one knee. "Enough," he said, his voice rumbling but calm. "You have won." Gasps filled the courtyard. The nobles stared in disbelief. Even the emperor sat straighter. Elias released the warrior and stepped back. His body hurt, but he remained standing. The warrior bowed deeply. "You fight with spirit," he said, "and with pride." Elias bowed back. "Thank you." The emperor rose slowly. For the first time, the throne glowed with warm light. "The second trial is complete," he said. "You have shown skill, willpower, and honor." Elias looked at Serelith. She smiled, small, relieved, and full of admiration. But the emperor was not finished. "Yet the final trial," he said, "will test not your body but your mind, your heart, your spirit. At sunset, the third trial will begin." Elias nodded, his breath heavy but his resolve steady. He had come this far. He would go further, for himself, and for the princess he loved. The sun dipped slowly toward the horizon, turning the sky into shades of amber and soft purple. The palace courtyard grew quieter as the final preparations were made. Unlike the first two trials, which involved physical challenges, the third trial required no changing floor, no weapons, and no warrior opponent. Instead, everyone knew this test would take place inside the Hall of Echoes, an ancient place rarely used because of how dangerous it truly was. Elias Ward stood before the entrance, his breathing steady but his heart heavy. He knew this trial would not test his strength or skill. It would test the deepest parts of his mind, his fears, his memories, his doubts. Humans were known for their emotional complexity, but that could be either a strength or a weakness. In this hall, emotional weakness could break a person completely. Princess Seralith stood beside her father on a high platform. She had been silent since the end of the second trial, not because she lacked faith, but because she feared the Hall of Echoes more than the other trials combined. Even for Orolith natives, the hall had a reputation for revealing truths they were not ready to face. The Emperor raised his hand, and the gathered nobles quieted. "Elias Ward of Earth," he said, "the third trial is the trial of essence. Within the Hall of Echoes, your mind will face illusions, drawn from your deepest thoughts. They cannot harm your body, but they can break your spirit. If you collapse inside, the trial ends in failure." Elias nodded. "I'm ready." The Emperor studied him carefully. "A human mind is unpredictable. Do not underestimate this place. Everything you fear, every regret, every memory you avoid will come for you." Elias met the Emperor's eyes. "Then I'll face them." The Emperor stepped back. "Enter." Elias approached the tall doors. They opened silently, releasing a faint wave of cool air. The hall inside was dark, except for thin lines of blue light that traced ancient symbols on the walls. Elias stepped forward, and the doors closed behind him with a heavy echo. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the air changed, and the hall came alive. Elias blinked. The stone walls melted away, replaced by something entirely different. He found himself standing inside a narrow steel hallway, rusted, flickering with damaged lights. Water dripped from pipes overhead. He recognized the place immediately. It was the remains of the mining station he had once worked in years ago, the very one that had collapsed and nearly killed him. A deep rumble shook the ground as flames burst from a torn pipeline. Elias's breath caught. This was not just a memory, it was the worst day he had ever lived. He forced himself forward. "This isn't real," he muttered. "Just keep walking." But the hall pushed harder. At the end of the corridor, a figure appeared. A face he hadn't seen in years. His old teammate, Jace, covered in soot and dirt the way he had looked during the disaster. Jace wasn't alive anymore, not after that explosion. "Elias," the illusion whispered. "You left me." Pain stabbed Elias's chest. He had not left Jace. The collapse had separated them, and rescue was impossible. But guilt had never faded. "You weren't alone," Elias said quietly. "I tried to reach you." The illusion's eyes filled with accusation. "You could have done more." Elias closed his fists. His throat tightened. The hall was trying to break him, to twist his memories against him. But he stood firm. "I did everything I could," he said, louder this time. "You knew I would never abandon you." The illusion froze. Then, slowly, Jace's image dissolved into mist. The steel hallway faded. Now Elias stood on a quiet beach under a dark sky. Waves rolled gently over the sand. This memory was not painful, it was peaceful. Too peaceful. That was the warning. A shadow rose from the water, forming into another shape. When the mist cleared, Elias saw Seralith standing in front of him, but different. Her eyes were cold. Her expression, emotionless. "You think you are worthy of me?" the illusion asked. "Worthy of the throne? Worthy of the Empire? Elias inhaled sharply. This illusion was not from memory, this was the hall speaking through her image. You are weak, the illusion continued. Your species is weak. Why would a princess choose a human? Elias exhaled slowly. You're not her, but the doubts are yours, the false Seralith said. You wonder if you deserve her. He did not speak. The illusion was right. He had wondered, often. You will fail, the illusion whispered. Humans always reach too far. And when they fall, they take others with them. The waves surged higher, turning into dark shapes that reached for him like claws. The wind howled, swirling sand around him. Elias closed his eyes, fighting the instinct to run. He let the fear wash over him, let it hit hard, let it echo in his chest. Then he spoke, his voice steady despite the storm. I don't need to be perfect to be worthy of her, he said. I just need to be myself. The storm broke like glass. The false Seralith dissolved. The beach vanished. Elias opened his eyes to find himself in a completely empty void. No light. No walls. No ground, just endless darkness. Yet he somehow stood on something solid. A faint whisper surrounded him. It grew louder, more aggressive, more overwhelming. The whisper formed words he couldn't understand, like the thoughts of 1,000 beings speaking at once. This was the heart of the Hall of Echoes. The final trial. The whispers turned into a roar. A storm of voices that demanded he kneel. Demanded he give up. Demanded he surrender to doubt. Some voices were his own. Some were strangers. Some sounded like every fear he had ever tried to bury. He felt his mind shaking. His knees buckled. The darkness pressed against him like a force trying to crush him from all sides. He fell to one knee. His breath became shallow. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. He felt himself slipping, but then something changed. He remembered Seralith's eyes, warm, trusting, full of hope. He remembered the people he had protected, the lives he had saved, the friends he had lost, the choices he had made. Not perfect choices, but honest ones. Humans did not survive by being fearless. They survived by standing back up after falling. Elias placed his hand against the invisible ground and pushed himself to his feet. I came here to prove myself, he whispered. Not to you, not to the nobles, not even to the Emperor. His voice grew stronger. I came here to prove something to myself. The whispers screamed louder, but he did not kneel. I'm human, he said firmly, and humans don't break this easily. A shockwave burst outward from his body. The darkness cracked like shattered stone. Light spilled through the fractures until the entire void exploded into brightness. When Elias opened his eyes, he stood once again in the real hall. The Emperor, the Princess, and thousands of spectators stared at him in stunned silence. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, sweat dripping down his forehead. But he was standing. The doors behind him closed. The Emperor slowly stepped forward. His expression was unreadable, but the hall felt different, quieter, more respectful. Elias Ward, the Emperor said. You faced your mind. You stood against illusions shaped from your deepest fears, and you overcame them. Elias straightened despite his exhaustion. The third trial, the Emperor continued, his voice echoing through the courtyard, is complete. Seralith covered her mouth as her eyes filled with tears, relief, pride, and astonishment. The nobles murmured among themselves, speechless. Some even bowed their heads. Elias had done what many Orlith challengers could not. He had faced the truth of his soul, and he had won. The night settled slowly over the Orlith capital, painting the sky with deep blue and silver streaks. Stars sparkled above like scattered crystal dust, and the palace lights glowed softly against the tall towers. The city was quiet, as if holding its breath after the events of the day. Inside the palace courtyard, however, the silence felt heavier, filled with tension and anticipation. Word had already spread across the empire. The human had survived all 3 trials, but the empire was old, and tradition commanded one final step, not a challenge, not a duel, Not a test of strength or mind, but something far more significant. A judgment. Elias stood alone in the center of the courtyard. His body felt sore, his muscles heavy from the second trial's duel, and his mind still carried fragments of illusions from the Hall of Echoes. Yet he stood upright, calm, and ready. He had no idea what the Emperor would decide. But his heart did not waver. Seralith had chosen him, and he would stand by that choice no matter what came next. Princess Seralith watched him from the platform, her hands clasped tightly. She had seen every moment of the trials. She had seen his determination, his courage, his fear, and his refusal to give up. And though she trusted him more than ever, she knew the Empire could be cruel when protecting its traditions. Her heart beat quickly, and she wished she could run down to hold his hand. But that was forbidden until the Emperor made his final ruling. The nobles filled the stands behind shimmering barriers. Some looked uneasy, others looked frustrated. A few whispered angrily among themselves. And yet more than a few had eyes filled with reluctant admiration. Elias had earned their respect, even those who did not want to admit it. The Emperor stepped onto the central dais, wearing robes that shimmered like liquid silver under the starlight. The throne behind him pulsed with soft light, reacting to his thoughts as always. He stood tall, his expression calm, but his eyes carried something new, something thoughtful, something heavier. Elias bowed his head respectfully. The Emperor raised a hand for silence. "Elias, Ward of Earth," he said, his voice strong yet heavy. "You have completed the 3 trials of legitimacy. You faced confusion and overcame it. You fought strength with resolve. You faced your own spirit and did not break." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "But the trials," the Emperor continued, "are only the beginning. For the decision that must be made will not only affect my daughter, but the future of my empire, and your place within it." Elias nodded once. "I understand." Seralith swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the Emperor. She knew the decision would change everything. The Emperor turned so that everyone could hear clearly. "The union between my daughter and this human challenges everything our people have held for generations. Some of you fear that allowing this marriage weakens our traditions. Others fear it dilutes our honor. Others worry it will invite chaos." Voices rose in mixed agreement. Elias listened quietly. The Emperor continued, "But traditions survive only when they are strong enough to face change. Honor remains only when tested. And chaos comes not from difference, but from unwillingness to understand." He looked directly at Elias. "Humanity is a young species. Impulsive, emotional, loud, imperfect. And yet," he paused, "there is something inside humans that deserves attention. A spirit that refuses to bow. A heart that refuses to break. A will that pushes forward even when the galaxy turns against them." The nobles whispered again, but this time with curiosity. Elias met the Emperor's gaze. "Your people think we are reckless," he said quietly. "Maybe we are. But we fight because we care." The Emperor nodded. "Yes. And that is what I have witnessed." He turned to the crowd. During the duel, he fought honorably. During the labyrinth, he outsmarted what should have defeated him. And in the Hall of Echoes, he endured what many Orlith warriors have failed to endure. His strength is not the strength of our kind. His abilities are not those of telepaths or energy-born races. But strength, the Emperor said slowly, comes in many forms. The crowd fell silent. Seralith's heart felt suspended. The Emperor lifted his hand. "Seralith, step forward." She obeyed, descending the steps with quiet grace. She stood beside Elias now, her presence warm, calm, unwavering. The nobles murmured louder now, seeing them together. The Emperor looked at them both. "This empire was built on unity," he said. "Not on sameness." He stepped toward Elias. "Kneel." Elias's breath caught. He dropped to one knee. "Look at me," the Emperor said. Elias raised his eyes. "In all my years, I have never allowed my daughter to choose her own partner outside our kind. But today, I have seen proof of humanity. Serelith inhaled sharply. The Emperor's voice rang across the courtyard. I recognize Elias Ward, not only as my daughter's chosen partner, but as a worthy member of this imperial family. Gasps burst across the courtyard. Some nobles shouted, others fell silent in shock, and many lowered their heads in respect. Serelith's eyes filled with tears, and she pressed a hand against her mouth to keep from crying out. The Emperor reached down and placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. Rise. Elias stood. From this night onward, the Emperor said loudly, the Empire will acknowledge this union. The human stands beside my daughter, not as an outsider, but as family. Serelith rushed forward, emotion breaking through her control at last. She threw her arms around Elias, and he held her tightly. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some shocked, some still uncertain, but the sound filled the night like thunder. The Emperor allowed the moment, his expression softening by a fraction. When Serelith pulled back, Elias looked at her with relief and gratitude in his eyes. She whispered, I knew you could do it. He smiled slightly. I didn't do it alone, but the night was not over. Just as the crowd began to settle, a sudden pulse of dark energy rippled across the courtyard. Every guard snapped to attention. The Emperor stiffened. Serelith grabbed Elias's wrist. A hooded figure stepped from the shadows near the entrance. Then another. And another. A dozen figures, clad in dark armor with glowing red symbols, appeared at the edges of the courtyard. Fear swept through the nobles like a wave. The Emperor's eyes hardened. Shadow Heralds. Elias recognized the name immediately. They were extremists who rejected all alliances and believed the royal bloodline must remain pure. They had already tried to attack the palace once. He clenched his jaw. The leading herald stepped forward, voice cold and sharp. This decision is an insult to our ancestors, he shouted. We will not allow the throne to fall into impurity. Guards moved instantly, drawing weapons. Serelith pulled Elias behind her. But Elias gently stepped beside her instead. The herald pointed at Elias. The human dies tonight. Elias stepped forward. If you want to harm her family, he said, you'll have to go through me. The herald laughed cruelly. Gladly. Before the Emperor could give an order, the shadow heralds charged. Guards surged to counter them. The courtyard erupted into chaos, energy blasts, clashing weapons, shouts and screams. Elias grabbed a fallen guard's short staff. Its energy hummed through his hands. A herald lunged at him. Elias dodged, slammed the staff's glowing end into the attacker's chest, and sent him crashing to the ground. Another charged from the side. Elias blocked with the staff, spun, and struck again. Serelith used her telepathic abilities to disarm attackers, freezing their weapons mid-air. The Emperor unleashed waves of energy that knocked enemies off their feet. The nobles fled behind shields. The lead herald aimed a blade straight at Serelith. Elias moved before he thought, diving in front of her. The blade slashed across his arm, burning with energy. Pain shot through him, but he did not fall. He twisted, grabbed the herald's wrist, and forced the weapon aside before striking him with the staff. The herald stumbled back. Why fight so hard? He hissed. You are nothing here. A human. Elias wiped blood from his arm. Maybe, he said. But I'm the human who loves her. And that's enough. Numb. He struck again, faster, harder. The herald fell to the ground, defeated. Guards captured the remaining attackers. The courtyard slowly quieted. When the threat ended, Serelith ran to Elias and wrapped her arms around him. You're hurt. He laughed softly, even though pain burned through him. I'll survive. The Emperor approached them, his expression no longer stern but deeply respectful. You protected my daughter, he said. And my people. Elias shrugged lightly. It's what humans do. The Emperor placed a hand on his shoulder again. The crowd, still shaken, watched as the Emperor lifted his voice again. Let this moment be remembered. Let the Empire witness that strength does not come from blood alone. Sometimes, It comes from courage. Serelith held Elias's hand tightly. Elias looked around the courtyard, tired but proud. In that moment, under the starlit sky, with allies watching and enemies defeated, Elias Ward stood, not as an outsider, not as a challenger, not as a stranger. He stood as the human who changed an empire.